Hey everyone, it's Zack Beck. The Biden administration is pursuing a substantial economic agenda, and they just made progress towards reaching their goals with the House of Representatives passing a $3.5 trillion budget bill. And this bill is going to have direct impact on your lives as well as our economy, as we are already concerned about prices that are skyrocketing, and now this could potentially make inflation even worse. But in this bill, there is a lot baked into it. It includes everything from expanding paid and family and medical leave to making childcare more accessible, creating universal pre-K, and making community college tuition free. It also extends the enhanced household tax credits that were passed during the pandemic, and it recommends lowering the Medicare eligibility age while expanding benefits to include dental, vision, and hearing. This measure also calls for expanding green energy and curbing climate change through business tax incentives, consumer rebates, and pollution fees. So as you can see, there is a lot baked into this bill, and it could have a direct impact on your life. So what I want to do in this video is break down in detail what is going on with this package, the likelihood of it actually passing and becoming law, and then how it could directly impact our economy, and specifically inflation, which we are already seeing running rampant throughout our world because prices are going more expensive. We're having more difficulty keeping up with globalization. Our supply chains are limited due to the pandemic, and now we need to know how you and I can position ourselves effectively to be able to navigate the situation and come out the other side ahead. So let's take our time, dive into the details, and jump into it right now. As previously mentioned, the House of Representatives just passed the framework for a $3.5 trillion piece of legislation that is going to be the new budget for the United States of America. This is a significant undertaking. It's going to create a lot of work throughout the country, but more importantly, it has the ability to impact your finances directly while even potentially providing you with some benefits as well. So what I want to do right now is talk a little bit about how we got here and where we're going to go as whether or not this is actually going to become law. It's important for us to understand that the United States Senate and the House of Representatives are two different bodies, but they must work together in order to pass pieces of legislation that ultimately get signed by the president. So if we go back a little while, the United States Senate passed an infrastructure bill. This is focused mainly on roads, on bridges, on airports, on expanding broadband, basically physical infrastructure throughout the United States. This was roughly $1 trillion package that was passed by the Senate, and it was brokered by a group of bipartisan senators who brought this together. They passed this bill with the expectation that we would have President Biden sign into law, which he is committed to doing. But what has happened is that this piece of legislation has been held up in the United States House of Representatives by Speaker Pelosi, who wants the social infrastructure $3.5 trillion budget to be passed first before she allows her members in the House to actually vote on the physical infrastructure. This has caused all sorts of challenges, specifically with moderates who are existing in the House of Representatives, as currently the Democrats have a very slim majority, which actually keeps Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker. So what ultimately has happened is that coming to this agreement, what they have said is that the House of Representatives, by passing this $3.5 trillion piece of legislation, they put a stipulation in there that said that they would also vote on the physical infrastructure bill no later than September 27, 2021. So by putting in that deadline, what Nancy Pelosi is saying and what the House of Representatives is saying is that they are kicking this back over to the Senate for them to come up with the actual language based off of the $3.5 trillion structure of that budget, and they will vote for the physical infrastructure bill no later than September 27th. Now I know this is a bit confusing, but it's important to be aware of this because oftentimes when we read splashy headlines, when we get news media attention, we think that something has happened when it really hasn't come to completion. And what we're going to see occur right now is that the physical infrastructure bill has the ability to become law after September 27th if the House of Representatives votes for it. And right now, that $3.5 trillion budget framework that was passed by the House has been kicked over to the Senate for them to do the same, where they have to make their own modifications to it in order to ultimately have that be signed by President Biden. So there's a lot of work that's going to be coming ahead from Congress, and there's going to be some modifications made because, as we know in our own lives, you have to make compromises along the way. And in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, you have liberal lawmakers, conservative lawmakers, you have more moderate lawmakers. So trying to find a middle ground is always challenging, but it's ultimately what is going to get passed. So that's where things stand right now, and the likelihood of passage of this bill is pretty likely because President Biden has made it clear that he wants the physical infrastructure bill to become law and the social infrastructure bill to become law. So they're going to do what they can to make this actually happen. One interesting thing to note is that this $3.5 trillion piece of legislation that was passed in the House was the general framework, and now it's gone over to the United States Senate, where the Senate is going to basically actually put together the language through what is called budget reconciliation. This allows them to actually bypass what is called the Senate filibuster, which would normally require 60 senators to vote on something in order for it to pass. Now, when they have this going into the Senate, it only requires 50 senators to vote for it, with Kamala Harris being the tie-breaking vote, because right now we have 50 senators who are Democratic and 50 senators who are Republican, and that because they have a tie-breaking vote, it goes to Kamala Harris, the vice president. So the Senate now can go forward and push forward on this $3.5 trillion piece of legislation, but they're going to need to convince some of their more moderate senators, such as Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, to come on board as Democratic moderates, and by doing that, they're probably going to have to lower the price tag and maybe adjust some of the language in the bill. The actual interesting thing is the individual who's going to be in charge of rewriting this bill is Senator Bernie Sanders, who is one of the most liberal lawmakers who you've probably heard of before because he ran for president multiple times. So from that perspective, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But once again, this is more on the social, or what we call soft infrastructure bill. The physical infrastructure package has already been passed. It's just waiting for the House of Representatives to give it a final approval before it goes to President Biden. Now that it looks like we're going to potentially see a physical infrastructure bill become law and a social infrastructure bill become law, I believe it's important for us to understand the magnitude and scale of all of this spending and how it's potentially going to impact you and myself and our direct wallets. So when you think about over the course of the pandemic, the United States government spent nearly $5 trillion. When you think about all those stimulus packages, the stimulus checks that you received, when we had all sorts of regulations that were pushed out by the federal government, funneled out through the state to the county and local government, all sorts of spending going across the board. This is a matter of fact some of the most amount of money that's ever been printed and produced during the course of the United States history just during this pandemic alone. And now what we've seen because of that, coupled with additional issues with the pandemic such as supply chain shortages and globalization issues, we have seen prices continuously and steadily increase in almost every single sector. Some of them have been short-lived, like we saw happen with lumber or we saw happen with used cars, but what we're seeing right now is precipitously everything is continuing to get more expensive, and that's on top of already issues that were existing, such as a housing shortage and such as wage stagnation not keeping up with inflation. So it's getting more and more expensive just about anywhere you live in the United States of America, and specifically you're in a very high, dense populated area, such as like New York City, San Francisco, or anywhere else where you're going to be in more of an urban area, you can only imagine how much worse it is right now, especially when you're considering housing prices. So if the United States government is now considering adding $4.5 trillion additional dollars of spending into the economy, but also in various forms, like I said, of expanding social programs, this inevitably is going to have an effect on the dollar. And right now the dollar is strong. It's the universal currency that pretty much everyone bases their worth off of. So it's very important that we keep our dollar strong. But what we're going to find is that over time, you generally expect inflation historically to run at about 2 to 2.5%. That means that you're generally going to have your dollar be worth 2.5% less every single year. And that's why it's important as an individual to do other things just outside of saving your money in order to make sure that your money keeps up with inflation. So hopefully it's earning more than 2.5% every year. Preferably, if you're doing that in the stock market, you might be doing that through real estate, you might be doing that through something different like a CD or a high interest savings account. But because interest rates are so low from the Federal Reserve, you really cannot get those kind of rates with a CD or a savings account. You almost are encouraged and incentivized by the Federal Reserve to invest your money into the economy and specifically into the stock market. Personally, what I like to do is put my money into index funds because that has a historical record of returning anywhere between 7 to 10% on an annual basis when you adjust it for inflation and you have your dividends reinvested. So if you're doing things on your own personal level, at your personal financial level, you're hopefully going to be able to mitigate some of the issues that are going to come from this spending. One thing that was noticeably left out of this piece of legislation was canceling student loans. And what we've seen previously is that has been a significant issue, especially amongst millennials who are straddled with trillions of dollars worth of student loan debt, and they're having a difficult time overcoming this issue in order for them to be able to move forward in their own personal lives. But right now, there's no mention of student loans in this budget, so you're going to be on your own with that for right now until we see some separate legislation passed, which is going to be increasingly difficult as we get closer and closer to the 2022 election cycle. So there's a lot going on in Washington right now. It's important for you and I to be aware of this because what is happening with them printing all this money, spending all this money, is inevitably is going to have an effect on the value of the dollar. And what we're seeing right now with the rise of cryptocurrencies and other alternatives, it's becoming increasingly challenging for us as Americans to be able to look at our dollar and see it as having just as much value as it did a few years ago because of how much money we've printed and spent over the course of the pandemic. With all that being said, I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. If you wouldn't mind, please tap the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Help push this video to other people who might need to hear it. Furthermore, if you have any questions, please comment down below. I'd love to interact with you, get to know you, do anything I can to help you as you move forward through life, but also just answer any questions for you specifically about this topic. Furthermore, if you wouldn't mind, please subscribe to the channel. That'd mean a lot to myself personally, as I do everything I can to create positive content that makes a positive impact in your life by helping you and myself to lead lives of meaning and purpose, all while maintaining balance and moderation by making wise and well-informed decisions in our lives. And if you do subscribe to the channel, please tap the notification bell. That'll notify you every time I post a video, which I do on a weekly basis. Once again, I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. I hope you have one from me your day. Talk to you next time. Whoosh.